Judges, would you please introduce yourselves?
It's my turn, right? All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Scott Barnhart. I'm an attorney in Indianapolis, Indiana. I work for the Indiana Attorney General's Office. I do consumer protection law for the Consumer Protection Division, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say today. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Marcia Holland. I'm an attorney in Missoula, Montana. I was a career public defender in Alaska and then moved back to Montana where I teach at the law school here. And I just finished doing my mock trials on Zoom. So I'm glad we the people gets to continue in this fashion so we get to hear from you today. Thank you for being here.
Good afternoon. My name is Becca Steinhoff. I am in Casper, Wyoming. I am the executive director of the John P. L. Bogan Foundation, and I'm delighted to hear from you all this afternoon.
All right. If you would all introduce yourselves, that would be great.
Hi, judges. My name is Hope Hutchinson, and my favorite non-governmental organization is the Equal Justice Initiative for their work towards prison reform.
Hello, my name is Gabe Smeeds, and my favorite non-governmental organization is Food for the Hungry for their humanitarian work relief.
Hello, my name is Shelby Williams, and my favorite non-governmental organization is UNICEF for its work towards the welfare of children. And on behalf of Tahoma High School, our advisor Gretchen Wolfing, and the state of Washington, we greatly thank you for judging us today.
All right. We are glad to be here. Let me pull up the question and we will get started. All right, we're doing question number 1. Thomas Hobbes noted that life in the state of nature is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. How has the human condition changed over time, and how has that change reflected in our expectations of government? Should the principles of natural rights or classical republicanism guide policy changes designed to improve the condition of all people? What are the most pressing domestic and global challenges facing Americans today and in the future? What policies can you suggest to address them? You may begin.
What is the government itself but the greatest of all reflections of human nature? James Madison, Federalist Number 51.
Thomas Hobbes in the Leviathan argues that in order to better one's condition in the state of nature, individuals come to a mutual agreement to give up some individual liberties to the government in return for common security, thus forming a social contract.
In turn, the government, which derives its power from its citizens, has a duty to better the human condition. The US government has improved the human condition through strides towards equality of its citizens.
Advancement towards the human condition and the equality of all has come with the implementation of the 14th Amendment, granting all persons born or naturalized in the United States the title of citizenship. This ensures every citizen the individual rights guaranteed in the Bill of Rights and the benefits laid out by the Constitution and its powers.
The given advancement in the human condition would not have taken place without civilian recognition that the government is ideally a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, as established in the preamble of the Constitution.
Combined elements of both classical Republican and natural rights philosophy should continue to be implemented to guide policies to improve the condition of all people. Both philosophies can cause harm and not be in the interests of all.
Polybius, in his book Histories, remarks that the greatness in a nation is achieved through both great individuals who portray civic virtue, as well as individual participation of citizens within society to promote the common good. However, civic virtue cannot be forced, and the common good can leave out the good of minority groups.
On the contrary, natural rights philosophy places an importance on the inherent rights of individuals rather than the community as a whole.
Recently, classical Republican virtues of promoting community welfare are reflected through Executive Order 14015. The order aims to create policies to aid and elevate low-income and underserved communities, specifically with regard to people of color.
Additionally, positive implications of natural rights philosophy have come with rights against self-incrimination established within the Supreme Court case Miranda v. Arizona.
The case established that individuals are given the rights of an attorney and protection against self-incrimination, further expanded upon through the freedoms of the 5th and 6th Amendments.
As seen through Executive Order 14015 and the implementation of Miranda rights, a mixture of classical republicanism and natural rights philosophy should be used to help ensure the advancement of the human condition and policy changes.
Political polarization and the COVID-19 pandemic are the most pressing challenges facing the US globally and domestically. Extreme gridlock and divisiveness are occurring in the American government, due in large part to the two-party system. Of the 16,601 bills proposed to the 116th Congress, 89% went to other legislation, meaning they were introduced, referred, or reported to a committee, but no further action was taken.
When government officials struggle to achieve domestic objectives, foreign issues seem impossible to overcome, as seen in the US response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Leaders were unable to come to a compromise on the forefront, resulting in delayed response.
Afghanistan was able to effectively handle the pandemic as the government cooperated with the Taliban to combine forces against the crisis, despite the harsh conflict since 2001.
The two groups' unity is reflected in the words of Muhammad Naim Usman, the director of Afghanistan's health department. The coronavirus is your problem, our problem, and the problem of the poor and the rich. It does not discriminate.
The American government should learn from Afghanistan and move towards unity with regard for the health and safety of the nation. American polarization has only increased with the pandemic. Increased internet use has allowed for Americans to be subjected to false information shared via social media, which furthers the issue of polarization and infringes on the free conscience of Americans.
To combat misinformation, we suggest fact-checking software be implemented on all social media at a national level. We are not condoning censorship. However, we argue that under the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, definite sourcing of inflammatory claims should be cited on all social media, allowing for citizens to form their own opinions. The growing polarization that led to the devastation caused by the COVID-19 pandemic can be decreased through fact-checking regulations on social media.
Thank you. So I do have a question related to the point you were just making. There's a certain demographic that gets most of their information through social media, that is Instagram, Snapchat, a little bit of Facebook for kind of a certain group. And then there's a different demographic who's watching TV or listening to radio. The Fairness Act, which hasn't been in effect for 10 years, a decade, required the traditional media, at least if you're presenting news, had to have a different point of view, the opposite point of view, or at least a critical point of view. Do you see any way to either have that fairness doctrine be reinstated, or is it even possible to be reinstated on social media that you all are following, where you have to have both sides of the story, or at least hear the other side of the story? What do you think?
I would argue that in some form, we can kind of see a Fairness Act being enacted within social media if there was a way to sort of combat the algorithm that we see in modern day times. So a lot of times, certain individuals who are associated with a certain political party will only buy into that specific news source that supports their views. And that creates a further algorithm, and it takes you down sort of a rabbit hole, which allows for you to only gain your information from these one-sided sort of news outlets. And we see this issue increasing as we see one-sided or one issue policy voters. And that's because they're only getting their information from one source. So if we were able to dismantle this kind of algorithm that has been implemented on social media, we might be able to see a basis kind of knowledge go across all party lines.
Thanks.
I would agree with my colleague Hope, and I would argue that it can be reinstated, as differing views don't necessarily have to mean false information. Individuals need to be introduced to differing views in order to be informed outside of their personal bubble, because due to only seeing one side, that's how that other group gains the upper hand in being able to misinform others.
Thanks.
You talked a little bit about the government, of course, being of the people, by the people, for the people. And then you also spoke about equity and ensuring that everyone has an opportunity. So how do we reconcile those and ensure that those who have been marginalized or come from a disadvantaged community have a voice that's heard, so that they are among those represented by or otherwise gain benefit from the government?
I would argue that it can start through disabling voter disenfranchisement, especially within my home state of Washington. Native Americans create a large percent of our population, yet they're not necessarily able to be included in the census because they don't have a correct address due to them living on reservations. If we are able to create a blanket statement or even get rid of some certain disenfranchisement laws, such as voter IDs, we can see a higher turnout at the polls and therefore get a greater consensus of everyone's importance input within our government.
To further my colleague's point, we've seen with the use of the First Amendment, change has been brought to marginalized groups, especially with the recent Black Lives Matter movement. Change has been brought to the judicial system, especially being recognized through the verdict through the Derek Chauvin trials, in which it was recognized that we must hold officials accountable and has truly set a standard for further changes to be brought upon.
To expand on my colleagues, I believe that this change can also be brought through the legislative branch. And to also expand on my colleague Hope, that voter representation for these marginalized groups is much smaller than you see for voter representation for the larger majority groups. And an increased voter representation of them could bring to larger amounts of these minority groups in our legislative branch through Congress and the Senate to bring a voice to them.
Thank you.
I'd like to go back to the algorithm problem and ask you, in terms of these algorithms are owned by companies, they're run by companies. So what's the government's role in sort of impacting or controlling these algorithms, if any?
We see a lot of sort of government trying to intervene within Section 230 of the CDA. And so this allows for basically social media platforms and individual private entities to not be responsible for what their users are posting online. And it creates a lot of conflict and a lot of disagreement, because it allows for some content to be published that's not necessarily suitable for all ages. So if the government can kind of intervene, we've seen that the Trump administration wanted to go in on Section 230 and actually make it a little more definite and define what those limitation and statutes were, because it is a fine line with private entities and the government trying to intervene.
To expand on my colleague, the government should not have a role in deciding which posts can stay up, and neither should corporations. But instead, we argue that they should provide a warning or a citation to all the information included in these polarized posts to help guide the viewer and the reader to form their own opinion, to see their own to be exposed to both sides of the argument as well. As we can see that corporations will almost always protect their own interests, as well as the government. We cannot trust a single entity or a single corporation to be in charge of this.
And so, oh, go ahead, Shelby.
To further both of my colleagues' points, I would agree with them, as the government should be a mediator and truly trying to ensure that others are educated and exposed to all sides of the story, and really work to combat polarization and really promote unity, which is what our country was founded upon.
And I have about 10 more questions on this topic, but I'm going to switch gears just to ask a different or ask a question in a different area. Should the United States be involved in supporting both financially or in other methods countries around the world, including countries where we may not agree with their political decisions, such as China? So where would the line be drawn between providing support or not providing support if the United States is to be considered a global leader?
I would argue that the United States should not always get involved with political issues in other countries. We've seen that in the past, the United States has gone into other countries and the other countries weren't ready for our help. They didn't ask for our help. An example of this is in the 1920s, when the United States entered into Lebanon under a united coalition with Britain and Italy. And they went inside due to the fact that Lebanon was under attack from Iraqi powers, and the United States really wanted to help to combat this, but instead the tables were turned onto the United States, and a US fighter engine was even shot down due to this. So I would argue that the United States should not go into other countries unless help is specifically requested for it.
To add on to my colleague Shelby, the United States should intervene when it is already in prior agreements such as NATO or the United Nations. So if our allies are being threatened, that's when the United States has a duty to go ahead and try and resolve issues. But we have to recognize that Western style democracy does not work everywhere as it does in the United States.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks, students. Judges, would you like to share your feedback?
Yes, I think Scott's up first.
Yep, thank you. I really enjoyed your discussion about Section 230, right? These are really complicated issues, and you said some things that really made me think and kind of dig into this. That's what I deal with on a daily basis, quite frankly. And these issues are complicated, and you're thinking about them, which I really appreciate. I like how you tied the examples to the current examples to the historical examples, right? You did that in a very meaningful way, in a very impactful way. And I really appreciate that as well. And your Afghanistan example, I thought was phenomenal. I really did. It was a really good one. So nicely done.
Well, I was going to talk about Afghanistan too, because it's really an interesting observation, very astute. So I will go slightly different direction. The point that you were making about civic virtue, that it can't be forced, and then moving into the Miranda case as an example of how to protect individual rights and yet kind of basically force civic virtue on a structured organization such as crime fighting. I thought that was really astute, really an interesting observation to have made. And using the census in your state as an example about voter disenfranchisement, that demonstrates that you have a real understanding of current events going on. It makes me so happy to understand that you do. But then when you switch to go to Lebanon, and it wasn't the answer I was expecting, it was a much better one to demonstrate that even in the past, there have been situations where interfering with countries hasn't always really helped. And so I appreciate that you brought a historical perspective to my question, or to whoever asked that question. I think it might have been me. I really appreciated that contemporary contrast with that historical perception. So it's a really, really good way to analyze this really complicated question. I mean, this is one of the more complicated questions I've seen in all my years of judging. So what a good job you guys have done.
I would echo so much of what has already been said. So I'll add just a few things. I too just really appreciated that you struck what I thought was a wonderful balance in thinking about the complexity and the dynamics of some of this. In particular, that some of these philosophies where we talk about all and the common good are much easier to say than to actually get done when we talk about the equality or the inequality that might exist. I thought your examples were so robust. We heard so many things from you today that we hadn't heard before. And so it's delightful to get to this point in the afternoon and hear just some really interesting and insightful examples that we haven't heard before. So thank you for your really deep and wide research. It showed up first in your prepared remarks and then throughout your questions, which shows us that you did just a wonderful job preparing for this and being thoughtful and intentional about the ways that you would connect your comments and your thought processes. So very well done. Thank you.
Thank you so much.